Hello and welcome back to the Slipstream Entrepreneurs podcast. I am Rich Wharton, your host, and I'm joined by my co-host, as per usual, Hannah Brooks. Hannah, how are you this fine morning?
Fine as the morning, apparently. I don't know. We're going to have to mix this up, I think, every week. I'm always good, so it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about bringing the energy, I think, Hannah. I think as soon as we say good morning, like hello, like let's go type thing, it's like, yes, bring the energy. Let's
Yeah,
win the day.
yeah, definitely. Let's get after it.
And this morning we are joined by none other than Tim Silvey. So Tim has an absolutely unbelievable background, and I am so excited for this podcast because I am going to take so much value away from this, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. But Tim, good morning. How are you?
It's a very overwhelming introduction. Thank you. I'm good. I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for joining us. It's an absolute honour. And Tim, just to explain to the listeners in your own words who you are and your background, tell us who Tim Silvey is.
So I'm a dad, a husband, a dog owner. I live in the middle of the countryside, and I've worked for the last 19 years in Formula One sponsorship events, marketing, digital media, anything commercially related really behind Formula One. A spattering of other sports. I've worked quite a bit in golf and other forms of motorsport, but predominantly Formula One and you know, a few other things. Dabbled in some racing driver management, but again, very much on the commercial side of it. And in more recent history, podcasting, much more involved in the media side of things with the race media, where I'm doing a lot of work at the moment, and talent management, but again in Formula One and Formula E. So I probably 90% of my work's been in motorsport.
It's absolutely fascinating. What a background, and obviously most recently, you know, you've been doing a lot in, like you said, podcasting, which is quite relevant to us as such at this moment in time. But what drew you to sort of the media side and getting into podcasting?
Well, the podcasting came about because in about 2018-ish, 2019 maybe, I started a company called Motormouth, and the grand plan I had at the time was to create a website, an app, and maybe tag on a bit of events for motorsport fans. So basically, kind of like a Facebook of motorsport. And we built it. It exists. There's an app on the App Store called Motormouth that you can download on Android and iOS, and a website. And we were trying to figure out how to market it without a huge budget. So we thought, let's start a podcast. I thought, let's start a podcast. So I reached out on LinkedIn to anybody that had any experience in podcasting or broadcasting. And that time, even in 2018-ish, podcasting was nowhere near where it is now in the UK. So finding someone who knew motorsport, because I wanted the pod to be about motorsport, who knew motorsport, but also understood the media landscape or broadcasting or even podcasting was really difficult. But the first person that replied was a guy called Harry Benjamin, who we started the podcast together. Our first guest was a guy called Callan O'Keefe, who was driving for Fernando Alonso's F3, I think it was an F3 team at the time, FA Racing. And that was episode 1. And we carried on, and we're nearly at 200 episodes now, and Harry's still very much involved. So that was our entry into podcasting. And since then, it's obviously grown quite a lot, and we've added new shows and started our own network and done lots of other things in podcasting, and the whole industry has come along an awful long way since then.
Very exciting. I think because before we started recording, it's always the way, but we started talking about how podcasting is in its infancy, right? And from your perspective, it's got a long way to go here. I suppose, what would you like to see from like the podcasting sector in the UK, like right now, if you could have that?
I don't know. I mean, I think you're right. I think it is still in its infancy over here. I think, podcasting in the US is absolutely massive, and it's certainly getting there over here. I think there's, I think podcasting is slowly becoming something that's not just a hobby that people do anyone that has an idea starts a podcast, which I think is great, but I think people are coming to the realization that actually it's a really commercially viable thing to have. There are ways to monetize podcasts, several ways to monetize podcasts, and they require, as you guys will know, a lot of hard work in terms of reaching out to guests and editing, post production, and artwork, and all these things that you have to consider. So I think people are starting to realize that it's a big industry, and now there's big events. There's an event every year, the podcasting show in London, which thousands of people go to, and it's become something that all major channels, rights holders, there's, in my world, there's so many Formula One podcasts, and F1 themselves have various shows. There's celebrities like Greg James getting involved. It's a really growing space, and I think people are wising up to the fact that it's a medium that is very attractive to listeners, but also is quite a nice way to earn some money as well.
No, fantastic, and I'm sure we will certainly be heading to the podcast show as soon as that's up, because I think the one thing for me is Hannah and I just went, we'd like to run a podcast. We actually decided that when we first met. Our initial call that we had, we just decided, let's do a podcast together, let's go for it. And I'll be honest, my sole reason for podcasting is for networking. It's not often you get to meet people like yourself, Tim, or others that I've managed to connect with, and it gives you that credibility behind you. But what if first things first, obviously your podcast is massive, like I said, over 200 episodes, followers galore. My question to you is, who has been your most favourite guest to interview?
Probably Gunther Steiner. He was good fun because not necessarily because of the personality that you see on TV, but because he was so nice. Before we hit record, he was asking us loads of questions. When we finished recording, he was in no rush to go. He started asking about me and Harry and what we're up to and the other things that we're involved with. So I really enjoyed chatting to him. He was probably my favorite. And then there's been some really interesting ones, like a guy called Willie T. Ribbs, who's a racing driver from the US who faced terrible racism and real challenges getting to the top of the sport, was one of the most talented drivers of all time that a lot of people haven't heard of, but he's got a show on Netflix called Uppity, which is well worth watching. And then, we've had people who have not been so nice. Like Nico Rosberg was a little bit awkward. But on the whole, everyone's been pretty good. We've had all sorts of people, some really well-known names that you would expect to be difficult, and they're actually really lovely people. Even William Story, the guy from Rich Energy, who everyone slags off. I couldn't help but like him, and we were really confused by the end of the podcast. Like, oh my god, he's actually all right. Like, I'd quite like to go for a beer with him. I've enjoyed every chat, to be honest. That everyone has their own quirks and features, and nice things and not so nice things. But I've enjoyed them all. It's hard to pick one, but if I had to, it would probably be Gunther.
No, fair play. No, it's funny actually, because you see, most people will know him from Drive to Survive. Gutted that the next series is just not going to feature him as much as what it probably should. It's just a story about him, and just forget about everyone else. But he seems like such a down to earth guy. He's always meeting up with the other bosses. He's going for wine tasting and all different sort. It just seems like a genuine, down to it. And when things were going tough, and don't get me wrong, Haas have had such a tough time of late. They're tiny compared to all the other teams. And he's just there, just like, come on, we can do it. And then obviously he goes to that stage where he's just like, F this, I can't do this anymore. And you're just like, that's a natural human being response that you don't normally see on the F1 pit wall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he just wears his heart on his sleeve, and he is who he is, and he's just a really, really lovely guy. I mean, we didn't even have to bleep him out. He barely swore on our podcast, which is quite surprising. But no, he's a lovely bloke. I mean, I haven't got a bad word to say about him. I don't know him well. I mean, we just had the hour that we had with him. But for if he's like that all the time, then yeah, he's a very, very nice chap.
Yeah, that's great. I think just to go back then, you touched on the commercialization of podcasts. So this flows nicely into your other work. So can you tell us a bit more about that and like how you got into it, essentially?
The sponsorship side of things.
Yeah.
So I got into it by accident because I left. I was a bit of a disaster at school and went to university, dropped out in my second year, and then did a bit of traveling. Did a year in America where the reason I dropped out is because I did a year in America and earned some money as part of my course, like one of those sort of sandwich courses where you go out to industry. So I went to the States and did some work out there and found earning money way more exciting than sitting in a lecture theatre. So I canned university. And then I got a job with a company called Accountancy Editions, which I don't think is around anymore. I think it got swallowed up by Michael Page, which is a recruitment company. And I worked with them for about a year. And it was okay. I didn't love it, but I got to wear a suit and go to London, so I felt quite important, even though I was the bottom rung of the ladder. But a guy I played cricket with called Jonathan Badansky, I was having a match with him one day, and he ran a sports marketing agency called Badansky Sponsorship Limited, which at the time was working with a lot with Toyota when they were in Formula One, and Panasonic. And obviously Panasonic, Toyota hooked up and were in Formula One for a few years. And he said, well, if you're not enjoying it, why don't you come and do 3 months with me as an internship and see how you get on? So I did that and ended up staying for 6 years and left as a director and shareholder after those 6 years. And then as part of that, went out to the Middle East, where I decided I went to the Middle East on behalf of Badansky Sponsorship Limited to work at Yas Marina Circuit, the F1 track out there. And when I finished there, I just thought, I'm lining someone else's pockets here. What am I doing? So I started up on my own, and then I just started consulting in sponsorship, and that was 2012, and it's just sort of continued from then until now.
That's incredible. I mean, both Hannah and I'm currently working with a racing driver. Hannah's been approached by people, and it's an area we're really sort of fascinated in. We both love motorsport. We're both commercially driven, got that entrepreneurial side. And it sounds like from your side of things, you actually went into working in the space and then went, actually, I need to do this myself, and became an entrepreneur there. And you've had many, many businesses now, which have, ranging from mobile bars to podcasting to obviously the sponsorship side of things. But what really got that entrepreneurial drive going, obviously, when you first started out by yourself?
I don't know. I've tried to analyze this a little bit, and I think what it comes down to is that because I was crap at school and I had no academic skills whatsoever, I flunked my GCSEs. I'm terrible at maths. I had to have dyslexia lessons for years just to, read a book. So I was useless at all of that. But what I did have, and I think as a consequence of, having to compensate for being rubbish academically, I think I learned an ability to communicate quite well. And I think those people skills, and I don't call them soft skills anymore, because I had a chat with Mark Priestley and I called them soft skills when we were talking with him, and he changed my mind about the word soft skills. He's like, it's a bit of a derogatory term. Like, they're not soft skills. They're really important life communication skills. So I don't call them anymore, but essentially those. And I think by talking and chatting and networking and getting to know people, I just sort of went down that road anyway. Like, it just sort of organically happened. I didn't plan it. It just happened. And I sort of talked my way into some work at the London Olympics, where we had to recruit about 50 people within a couple of weeks to manage a traffic and transportation plan for all the athletes and some of the volunteers and stuff. So we did that for 6 months, and it was just through talking to people that kind of accidentally happened. Nothing to do with sponsorship, really, apart from we were dealing with some of the sponsors of the Olympics. And then one thing sort of leads to another, but the conversations that you have along the way are the things that open the doors, for me anyway. So it just naturally kind of meandered in that direction until I got to a point where I picked up a few more bits, and then did some consultancy with some agencies, and, things just sort of snowballed. And before you know it, you find yourself a sponsorship person. And then, you find yourself doing a few F1 bits, and then one thing leads to another, and you talk to someone else and you find yourself running sponsorship for an F1 sponsor, and it just escalated naturally without any pre-planning whatsoever. So I can't pretend that I had this grand plan to do what I'm doing. It just sort of happened that way through talking to people.
That's the best way, I think, though, right? Because it's like it's natural. It's not a forced. Like sometimes I think with university, especially, you know, people feel like they have to go to university. It's something you have to do, but actually around that, there's so much more. Like I worked full time while I was in my last year of uni because it just felt more natural to work than it did to sit and be forced to study something. So I completely understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, and university's not for everybody. I think if you're going to be a lawyer or a doctor or a vet, go to university. But equally, if I had a degree behind me with business and marketing, it would have accelerated my career. Who knows? But for me, it just wasn't. I felt like I was treading water at uni. I didn't feel like it was adding anything, and so for me, it was better to get out and just crack on. But I appreciate for some people, it's obviously very important.
I suppose university as well is quite. It's a place where people find their feet and realise it's that sort of transition from school life to. I mean, I never went to university, so I'm just looking from the outside here. But I've heard so many people talk about saying university was a waste of time, but actually then made them realise that actually that probably wasn't what they wanted to do, and they've moved into something else. And the people you meet, networking is, I believe, is probably one of the most important skills out there. The rooms I've got into, the people I've spoken to, podcast is only helping this as well, which is amazing. But I just love talking to people, hearing people's stories. And I think one of the biggest things for me is making referrals. And I don't know whether you found this when you first started in sponsorship, but just making those referrals and helping people generate more business that way. Like, is that one of the most important things of how to become successful in the sponsorship game? Obviously, there's that activation and generating money. But did you start off with referrals, or did you just go straight in with different commercial deals?
Yeah, there were some referrals both ways. I did try and help people where I could and facilitate conversations for people and bits of business because, that fosters good relationships so that could benefit you in the future. And some people pushed things my way, and that definitely still happens today. And it's not necessarily always a payoff. It's not always here's a referral, where's my money? Sometimes it can just be out of the goodness of your heart. You're helping someone else to give them a leg up or whatever it might be. And these relationships get built off the back of that. And good deeds come around. I've certainly experienced that. It's got harder as I've gone through the industry, only because my time now compared to my time 10 or 15 years ago is much more valuable to me in the sense that I have less of it. I'm so busy all the time, whereas before, I would try out, I'd go and speak to anyone I could and try and do a deal there or refer a thing here or try and find a way to be a middleman and make a bit of a cut. Or now it's much harder to keep that going, just because I think once you get deeper and deeper and deeper into something, time becomes much more valuable, and you learn to put your time and efforts into the things perhaps that are going to, now once you've got your knowledge, are going to actually make you more money. So I try now to focus on the things that I know are going to benefit me in a financial or a business way. But equally, if there's an opportunity to help somebody else during that process, then of course I will.
That's fascinating. I love that. What you said there is that sometimes you do it out of the goodness of your heart, and it will come back to you in a completely different way. Like you said, you're not doing a referral for money's sake. You're doing it for the fact of genuinely wanting to help someone, like you're doing here. This, we're not paying you to be here. I'll just make that clear to all the listeners out there, But the thing is actually you're doing us a massive deed by coming on and passing on the knowledge to us and our listeners. And I think that will come back to you in a different way. I'm sure that a lot of people listening to this who may not have heard of your podcast, and obviously we'll put your podcast links and anything links that you want in the description, but they will then come and listen to what you've got. And I'm sure there's going to be other people listening that they may want to get into business with you or whatever. It could be a whole heap of different things. I think the beauty of it is you don't know what the opportunity that is going to come from helping someone else.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, you've got to put yourself out there, and I enjoy doing things like this, and if I don't really care if someone's on episode 1 and has 10 listeners, I think it's always good to meet different people and chat, because you never know what someone else, no matter how inexperienced they are, could bring you. And I learn all the time there's a guy I work with called Luke, who works with me at WTF1 Talent. He's a talent exec there. He's 21 years old, and this is his first job out of uni. And I learn from him every day. Like he's amazing. He's so switched on. He's got his finger on the pulse. He knows exactly what's going on in the digital landscape. And every day I learn from him. I don't feel like, I'm his boss, or, there are occasions where there's that dynamic, obviously, but we're a collaborative effort, and I learn from him. I think you can learn from everybody. Even, I learn from my kids, and they're all under 10. So, I think it's just having an open mind, and it always makes me chuckle when, I come on things like this and people want to absorb things that I'm saying, because I still feel like, a novice. All I've got is 19 years of experience. That's it. And I know that helps, but everyone's still muddling their way through things and trying new avenues and having to keep up with the pace of, this digital world that we live in now. So, it always makes me it sort of makes me laugh that people want to hear the opinions of people like me, but if someone finds it valuable, that's great. And if they disagree, that's fine too.
That's amazing. I really want to speak about your new podcast network. I'd love to hear about it in your words, and just because it's quite a new venture for you, right?
Yes, it's brand new, really. When we started the Motormouth podcast and we got a certain traction, it was quite recent. Harry and I Harry was doing he was doing a podcast in MotoGP that was kind of winding up, and they didn't really want it to wind up. It was getting a good audience. It was doing well. So we said, well, why don't we take it and we set up a network that we put the Motormouth podcast on and the MotoGP show, which is called the OMG MotoGP podcast. So we added that one to our new network, which then now had 2 podcasts. And then we were like, well, this is good. Why don't we keep going and see if we can, get lots of podcasts. So we started a 3rd one, which is a paddle podcast, which we're relaunching in a couple of weeks, which we piloted end of last year. And then we've just signed another one with Mark Priestley, which is obviously his show, the F1, the Pit Lane Life Lessons F1 podcast with Mark Priestley, and that show's come onto our network. So we manage all the distribution and creatives and everything for him. We're relaunching that in May. We've got one with Nikki Shields coming online about sustainability. We've got one with Tom Gaymore coming about police, being in the police force and going on the road with the police, and a guy who, I don't know if we're allowed to say who he is yet because he's kind of mysterious, but he's got a big social following. He's like this. He's a policeman online that doesn't really give away his identity, but he's going to come and host the show with Tom. So we've got lots of shows coming online, and we want to have 25 by Q2, Q3-ish, and then hopefully over 100 by, we want to hit 200 by the end of 2026 is the plan. Again, sort of by accident, but with a little bit of design behind it, Harry, myself, and a guy called Tom McCluskey, who's a YouTuber in Formula One, have built this business, and we're about to take a studio space, and we're going to start producing more and more shows, some of which we own all the IP for, some of which we own none of the IP, but they just host on our network, but we do all the distribution and editing and all the artwork and everything. And we'll just keep growing and growing and growing, and we want to hit, several million downloads a month to a point where we've got something that's very valuable to the media industry that perhaps we could sell on. So that's the premise behind the business, and it's really fun, and it's motormouth.media if anyone wants to have a look at it.
Wow,
that's incredible. I think for me, obviously we're starting our podcast journey, and there's so many people like us who are thinking about starting a podcast, or someone's mentioned to them about potentially starting a podcast. And, I've always wanted to be a professional speaker. That's been my dream from, when I first started speaking at 18 and at my school and stuff. And you think, like, that's what I want to do. How can I do it? And I've tried so many different avenues to go and be a speaker, and things haven't worked out as such. But doing a podcast is a great place to start. And I think a lot of people have that fear in them of starting. You know, will someone find it valuable, or will I get any listeners? Will I get any followers? What is your best advice to someone who is literally brand new, thinking about starting a podcast? What would you say to them?
Well, don't worry about any of that stuff. Just talk, because I think if you're passionate about something and you've got an interest in it, the audience will come. I mean, we're with the Motormouth podcast. I mean, we're totally useless at social. We're crap at it, and that's basically a bandwidth thing which we need to address. But the audience, the audio audience is good and is sizable, and it's just because we speak from a place of passion. We enjoy talking to these people. Some of them are quite high profile, which obviously helps, because if they share it, it gets a bit of extra traction. But I think just enjoy what you're talking about, and persist, keep going. Don't give up. Like, we've released one show a week forever. It's relentless, but we've done it. You just got to keep plugging away at it. Just don't let. I don't know. I think just be yourself, be passionate with it, and just keep talking. And if it's an interesting subject that you're passionate about, there'll be a niche out there somewhere, and the audience will come. Obviously, the social media side of it is important, and you've got to do that. But I think go with passion and talk about something that interests you. If you're doing it for money, you're probably doing it for the wrong reasons. But having said that, once you grow and once you get an audience there are ways to monetize it. And as you say, it's a great way to get grounding in terms of speaking to different people and, knowing your audience and how to talk. And it leads to other things. I remember I went to, a bit like you, I've always enjoyed public speaking. And I used to go to the Black Book Motorsport Forum every now and again, and sit and watch and think, I wish I could do that better than that person. Like, I should be up on that stage. I'm like a 19-year-old or whatever. And, but you get your grounding, you learn how to do these things, and you go to the forum and you talk to some people, and before you know it, you're on the stage and you're hosting the panels, which is what I did last year at the one at the Oval, and I'm hosting again this year. And that's all come from the podcasting side of things. Really, it's given me that grounding and ability to learn how to talk to people in different scenarios. Someone who might be a CEO of a global company down to a young racing driver like the guys that you guys look after.
Oh, apologies, I think my computer froze there as I heard the end of it and stuff. So I do apologise for any silence there. But no, that's fantastic, and I think it's great advice for myself, let alone anyone else. It's then like both Hannah and I came together, decided to run this as a passion project. Both of us say it's pretty much every day, I think now, Hannah, that we just message each other and go, thank you so much for coming into my life. And it just gives you a bit of purpose. Something that interviewing racing drivers is great. Some of them are a little bit challenging, but it's great to hear their different stories. And our biggest thing is finding the story behind the story. I get the fact that you got into karting in the early ages in the single figures, and then you're really quick and you progressed on, and now you're looking for sponsorship, and you're the quickest thing since anything. I get that, but let's go back. Let's talk about your life. And one of the biggest things for us and what we're trying to do is to help racing drivers to understand, to tell their story, to connect with business people. Again, sponsorship wise, we see a lot of racing drivers just connect with everyone they possibly can on LinkedIn, get an email address and just send their pitch deck and hope for the best. And obviously I think we all know that doesn't work. Or it may work in the blue moon, but it's luck more than anything. But for those people who are potentially listening, looking for sponsors, looking for drivers looking for sponsorship, what would be your advice to them to try and seek sponsorship?
It would be to start with the brand. So, like you say, you can't just scattergun approach. Yes, it will work once in a blue moon, but generally it doesn't work. You have to start with the brand and analyze what market they're in, who their audience is, what demographics they have, what messaging do they have, what narratives do they have, what products are they trying to sell, are they a B2B company, are they a B2C company, and then try and solve those problems. Because for example, take a a business technology company, and their customers are other businesses. there is absolutely no point going, tell you what, we'll give you a massive logo on the side of the car, because they don't care about that. That's offering them no value. They're not a consumer brand. They don't care about eyeballs on the car. It's miles off. But if we said to them, I'll give you 10 free hospitality places at race X, and after that we'll have a business session where I'll bring in the head of commercial from whatever company, and we'll have a networking session with other people in the tech business space, and I'll be there to add some sparkle as the racing driver. We'll put your branding up around the place. We'll show a couple of videos, cinematic videos that you've got of your marketing, and we'll have a business session. Then they'll go, okay, well, so you're going to introduce me to a potential customer. Yeah. That's just logical sponsorship sense. But equally, if it's a consumer brand, then obviously, you need to do something more forward facing. And, then potentially the logo on the car becomes important. The visuals that you provide them become important. Can you provide them with video content they can repurpose for their socials? I mean, it really depends on what the brand want. And you've got to listen to that. So what I always do or have done over the years is the first questions that I ask are those, what markets are you in? Where's your demographics? Where's your audience? Do you go for a particular type of individual? What's their age? You've got companies like Velo and, these vaping companies or gambling companies or crypto companies there. You need to know that you can't advertise to people under 25 or that even look under 25. So how can you create content or create assets that appeal to people over 25? So there's all sorts of ways of doing it, and you need to be creative. There's no point, doing the usual, I'll give you a couple of free tickets and logo on the car. I'll make a couple of appearances at your office and I'll give you some photographs and I'll take 25 grand. Thank you. It doesn't work like that. But you could very easily go, well, why don't we put on a karting event and we'll invite 100 people from your industry, and you cover the costs of the kart track and jobs are good, and I'll do the rest. Just thinking outside the box, and that applies from karting level right up to Formula One. And we used to sit with companies like Hilton and Epsom and analyze what their objectives are as a brand, any strap lines or particular narratives they want to convey, and then we'd go away and create a whole go-to-market plan around their sponsorship, leveraging the assets that they get as part of that partnership, but get very creative about how we deliver those, and sweating those assets as hard as you possibly can, with ideally with an activation budget, because without an activation budget you're a bit stuffed anyway, and speak to the audience they want to speak to, and it's that probably. But also the other bit of advice that I would give is not to put yourself in a box where you're just going after endemic brands. What a lot of sponsorship consultants and freelancers do is go, well, let's look at other brands in the space and how can we go to them and activate their partnerships. It's quite good often to look at brands that have never touched motorsport in their lives, because that you're opening up a whole new audience to them that they didn't have yesterday. It doesn't matter if they don't make brakes or wheel nuts or I don't know, windscreens or whatever. It might be that there's a whole audience they haven't even discovered yet in motorsport. So go beyond the brands that you would think of for motorsport sponsorship, and just get a bit creative. But the key message is listening to the brand and not just going, here's my package, give me some money. Things.
I feel like that little snippet there of this podcast, I will have to re-listen to several times. I'm sure Rich will as well, because it was so insightful. And yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that.
It's all right.
I think what's pleased for me is the fact that that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm in the early stages of being a sponsorship manager. I hate that terminology. I think it's terrible, but because it's like finding sponsors, negotiating deals and activating. It's not just managing a sponsorship, and I can't find a decent word for it. But my thing is I love making those sorts of commercial connections and seeing how we can use a racing driver to activate. And I'm working with Logan Hannah this year, and being a racing driver who is female Scottish. We've got some really interesting things going on, which is really exciting. But it's then just having that commercial entrepreneurial side of me away from motorsport to think outside the box and think very, very differently. And, there's some really, really exciting things coming this year that we're able to do because I'm just thinking not like a racing driver. And yeah, I really want to help more racing drivers do exactly that and just think completely differently and kind of provide that education because, you see so many that are so talented and the only thing stopping them from reaching the heights that they want to get to is money.
Yeah. And it is super expensive to go racing. I mean, that's the big challenge. And that's what we always faced when we were working with the likes of, the first driver I worked with, like you're doing, was Max Chilton back in 2012, 2013, something like that, just as he was going from GP2 into Formula One. And at that time, I think the race seat he was going after was 11 million quid that he had to raise. So we had, you've got to find 11 million quid for a brand new British racing driver. It's not easy, and you have to get creative with the sponsorship and stand out from the crowd, particularly if you're, a back market team. So yeah, like I said, I think it's just about being very, very creative and strategic with your thinking. And sponsorship is not like it used to be, where it was a badging exercise. It's so much more now, and people want to see results and they want to see reports and KPIs being hit and tangible things that actually move the dial, rather than there's 400,000 people watching that race. Well, good. Well, how many of those actually paid attention to our brand during that race weekend? Well, probably none. So what else are we going to do away from the track? And keep the content going and make things evergreen. So it's a complicated business, and it's not straightforward, which is why it's so challenging. It's very, very hard to secure sponsorship at any level. It's a tough gig, but it's also very rewarding, in many ways, not least financially, if you can get it right.
100%. And spending your life watching racing and in activating sponsorship. I tell my wife that I have to go to these races because it's work. It's I love it. If you're a fan of any sport, to then watch it in VIP hospitality and essentially make money doing it, and networking as well. Networking with some really big players or some really interesting characters, and just having that experience. It's just like, what better place to watch racing than either in the garage or in a VIP hospitality unit.
Yeah, absolutely. It is exciting, and I remember those emotions. I think the most fun I ever had was probably during do you remember the ING Bank sponsorship of the Renault F1 team? So that there was 3 years where ING sponsored Renault, and I led that sponsorship for an agency for 3 years until it all blew up because of the Crashgate thing in Singapore with Nelson Piquet Jr. But that was a lot of fun because it was just before the financial crash, only just, but just before. So the brand was spending a lot of money. It was a badging exercise. They were like, we're just going to put as much branding on the car as we can and suck the life out of that and create some cool campaigns around it and amplify, and then get out after 3 years. But the job they did on it was insane, and the awareness of ING went through the roof. And we were doing exactly that. We were there's me and a guy called Jeremy Scoons, who I think's now at he's at Jack Daniels. I think he's heading up their sponsorships in F1. And he and I traveled the world on the F1 calendar for those 3 years and just had the best time ever, staying in lovely hotels and having a great time with the client and experiencing things I'd have never, ever dreamt of experiencing as a 19-year-old. And, just a lot of fun. And I think while the industry is a really challenging one, it's also a really fun one to work in. And if you're passionate about motorsport, it's, what better place to be than there. So I've got some very fond memories of those ING days before the whole world caved in during the financial crash.
Oh, amazing! I can only look forward to that in the future. And I know Hannah is really interested in that space as well. So it's something we want to work on potentially together. We have discussed it. It's early stages of a potential business there, but the people that we think like that.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're going into that world, I mean, the dream for me was always land an F1 deal, land an F1 or now maybe a Formula E or, there's one or two other series where you could get the really big ones. And there are people out there, freelancers who do it. There's people that make these deals happen and they're just people on their own and benefiting from a chunky commission off a multi-million-pound deal. And then, it's job done. So there's always that carrot dangling at the end of the line, that keeps you coming back. But there's nothing to say, people can't do that. They can't bring why can't an individual or a couple of people go out and find the next big F1 sponsor? There's absolutely nothing holding people back from doing that.
100%.
I mean, I think we're both so motivated after this call. We're going to have so many meetings off the back of it.
Because if I don't find one today, then
yeah.
No, amazing. I like Tim. Honestly, this has been the most incredible podcast. I think I'll be listening to this back. Like, I think the viewership will go through the roof simply because it's me listening to it like on repeat. I've got so much value. But just one thing, obviously we've got to wrap this up. We do value your time, and you've obviously got a busy day ahead as per usual. But one thing I've got my son in my house. We're spending the day with him today, so it's important to be a family man like you are as well. But one thing we always finish on, the question we always finish on is, if you could spend an hour with someone, whether alive or dead, who would it be and why?
Well, as I said to you off air when you were prepping me for this one, this is an easy one for me, and it's my dad, because I lost him in January, and was it January? Yes, end of January, and it was a relatively sudden decline, and it brought a lot of things into perspective for me. And we spent my last week with him in the hospital when he was going, and it genuinely changed the way I look at everything. Life, business, family, completely changed my view. So very, very easy that I would get him back for an hour and have a proper chat. So that would be it. Easy peasy, nothing to do with motorsport whatsoever.
Oh, Tim, firstly, I'm so sorry for your loss, but I think that's such a powerful thing to say. Is obviously once someone's gone, you don't have that time, and you would love to spend that time with them. I mean, I've worked in the emergency services for 12 years and realised how short life is. I don't leave the house or go to bed at night without saying goodbye to my kids, my wife, etc. And I completely understand that. And I think it's so powerful that those relationships that you have in your life, that you do make that a forefront. And again, people put that aside for business and all different sorts of work, all different sorts of things. But you just got to realise that actually there's one thing is important is family and those very close to you. So thank you for sharing that. That's just really, really powerful. It's actually hit my heart. Like, I'm a bit like welling up here, but Tim, thank you so much for your time. Like I said, I'm so grateful. It's been an absolutely amazing podcast. We will continue to follow what you do. If someone wants to reach out to you, speak to you, connect with you, follow what you're doing, whether it's everything that you're doing or just something, where's the best place to find you?
Probably through LinkedIn is probably your best bet. That's where I sort of live most of the time. And then if there's any content creators out there that are listening, that are looking for representation, just drop me an email through wtf1talent.com. We're about to rebrand that actually, but for the time being, that remains. We've got a rapidly growing roster of F1 content creators, but we're always looking for more. Particularly those with a sustainability slant, if there's any out there. But LinkedIn is probably your best bet. So just catch me through there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Have an amazing day. Thank you for everyone listening. Hannah, thank you very much as per usual. And I hope you all take care. All the best.